Thanks, Declan. I'll try and keep it in the time. As Declan said, I've the employer helpline in revenue. I'm going to, Sarah set out the social context, and similarly, I'm going to describe some of the revenues response during the time from the National Employer Help Desk perspective. Going back to January 2018, it was a very modest team, 18 FTE, looking after PAYE for employers and also providing support for the Collector General's helpline. That was a small team, and in 2018 we ramped up our PAYE modernization that was starting in 2019. This was a very different type of scheme to what we've done recently. It's an example of how revenue runs large projects. We'd scale up to support operations, support employers in advance, and we did the customer outreach, data preparation, seminar support, employer awareness, all that good stuff that we had time to do in advance. We started off with 18 staff, brought it up to 80 core and 160 trained in order to take us on. So it's a different type of project altogether. By January 2020, start of this year, not so long ago, we were marking a year of PMOD in play. Project was successful, significant employer engagement, and by the end of January, the end of year was mostly over. Contact volume significantly down. Experienced staff were going on to other projects. I suppose a lot of us were relieved that such a major project was successfully completed. And I have to admit that there was some relief amongst the team that were looking forward to supporting a stable and mature product. And that comfort didn't last long. February brought a lot of change to that mood. There was increased awareness of COVID around this coronavirus, as Sarah said. Preparing, planning, and getting ready we were ramping that up as information became available. Health and safety was our first priority at the time. Business continuity was a key concern for us. We were planning for on-site segregation into isolated teams. We were operating out of one location. During PAYE modernization, we were working out of 5 locations, so we had resilience built in. Our environment was changing. We were going back down, and one of the key issues we had was that we had to continue structure providing the service using on-premise. That was one of our constraints that we had at the time, on-premises phone service for our 1890 services. Likewise, in early February, we were minimizing travel. Very hard to get access to video conferencing facilities at the time. The end of February, the first coronavirus case in Ireland was, I suppose, a landmark. March came in like a lion, and it certainly didn't go out like a lamb. Revenue does preparations going on, gathering staff contacts, building management preparations, risk assessment. Very early on, revenue started prioritizing tax refunds. Across revenue, anywhere that there was money that could be refunded to a company or an individual, that happened. And revenue started announcing support measures for companies, interest delays, getting people to make sure that they're keeping their filing up to date, but creating support arrangements for those employers. So there's a lot of work happening in the scenes to make it as safe as possible for the staff and to support the employers and the companies as much as possible. Then on the 12th of March, we had the Taoiseach press briefing. I think we'll all remember that. The following day, we had staff that were able to work. We had to get them working remotely. Our primary concern was we couldn't lose those core staff that had the experience and the knowledge. Because what we were going to be doing is we had to support companies paying their employees. So payroll had to work. That was critical. We got people working from home straight away, and we implemented team isolation for those staff that were unable to work remotely. Some of the proposals that we had brought forward during the planning stage were leapfrogged very quickly. Over that weekend, the weekend of the 12th of March, that weekend in Patrick's Day, we implemented and tested all the technology that we needed to get our staff working remotely. Moved 6,000 employees, getting into a safe environment and getting them with full access to all their existing systems. And in particular, able to work a telephone line seamlessly. So the callers rang the existing number, they got the same service. That took quite a bit of effort. And at the same time, we also had to design and prepare the content for the COVID refund scheme on behalf of DEASP, which Sarah spoke about there. There were busy days. If you look at some of the timeline there as well, getting staff, getting them mobilized, getting them out, the detail that was involved in that, I won't go through it given the time constraints that was there. The COVID refund scheme worked for about just over a week, and then that was replaced by the temporary wage subsidy scheme. The temporary wage subsidy scheme was a very different beast than the COVID refund scheme. The COVID refund scheme was a relatively straightforward €203 payment. The TWIS, as some people call it, was rolled out in 2 phases. The initial phase, employers made submissions in based on their calculations, and we did a refund of €410 per employee, to each employer, and that we will come back and do a true up on the value later on. The operational phase then, in the 4th of May, commenced, and in that case, revenue were doing the calculations on an employee basis, a lot more employee-specific information based on all their employment. And that involved huge technology developments, huge preparations with employers, with all the payroll software developers. On a daily conference call with the software developers, we would have 40 software developers representing each of the payroll providers on every day, and that's still going on. And that was critical to us to be able to mobilize that function, because the payroll had to work for the employers to get the pay to the people and to build the subsidy scheme into it. This is a very complex scheme with varying rates and rules depending on the employee's previous wages in combination with the employer top-up payment. And we had to get that information out to the Payroll Software Developers Association and out to employers in a language that they could understand. And in effect, a new language emerged, including qualified payroll submissions, additional gross payments, ARNWPs, the stuff that employers know and love, and of course that word tapering, the one that nobody loves. This was a very complex scheme, and it had to be complex because of the scale and because of the value involved in it. It was complex for the employers to understand, and it was complex for the staff to get them up to speed with regard to what's happening as well. Just to give you some context of the scale of it, there's 52,000 employers receiving subsidy refunds, over 500,000 employees receiving subsidies. As of the 4th of June, there's 1.3 billion in refunds, payments being made to employers. In the last week of May, over 23,000 employees joined the scheme. So we're expecting to see another wave now as the country goes back to work of employers coming back in and starting to run the scheme. Those who had closed down, they're starting up again. And that 23,000 is just an example of it. Those figures are slightly out of date, but it shows the level 2 that's going on at the moment. With regard to the website, the COVID-related documents were downloaded almost 250,000 times. I was told that would put us on the bestsellers list, the pages of the FAQ. I'm not sure if anybody would go out and buy it, but it gives you an idea of the scale of the operation that was happening there. Revenue publishes statistics on a daily basis. So looking back over the timescale of it, it was a very aggressive timescale to turn that system around, to get those systems developed, put in place. So just talking about how the employer helpline itself was involved. Mobilization, I suppose, was the very first thing. On the 12th, I was in Dublin myself on the day on a completely different project, and the whole way down on the train, we were dealing with mobilizing staff, getting the health and safety, getting those staff out the door. We had to change from the on-sign call center environment to a remote operation while keeping services operational. Over the process, Revenue closed all its public offices and phone services, with the exception of 2. The employer helpline and the Ross helpline, they were the 2 critical services that had to stay open And I have to take my hat off to the staff on those. They went through very complex processes, moving from the comfort of an office environment to a remote. There's a huge amount of detail involved in it. Sarah gave some of the examples on themselves. But just getting staff out the door safely, getting the details of remote access, security, configurations, the new protocols with regard to remote access, paper, the amount of detail that goes into that is phenomenal. The scheduling of staff, just even getting staff back in, handling rotas to keep service operational and allowing staff to come back into the office to collect information to get their remote access fobs working was huge. In particular, the staff themselves, when you're working, asking staff to work remotely and you're experiencing the same yourselves, I'd imagine. For us, broadband in those early days was critical. This was before the telcos had ramped up the services. We were getting staff to work from home environment. And we were hearing stories about how staff were competing with their family members. If staff members studying for the Leaving Cert, limited broadband, limited access to computer equipment, who gets the computer? The reallocation of laptops, any computer was available in the organization was redeployed in order to facilitate those staff, those key staff, had to do it in the understanding. Because as this scheme rolled out, it had to be tightly integrated with the PAY modernization. The solution to that. It took a huge level of experience in order to be able to get that to continue working. With a rapid testing rollout of the Cisco Unity facilities, and I must compliment our own IT department and their support in order to get that off-premise working. We had to get into detail on regard to call drop statistics for staff members, for example, to determine who actually had the suitable coverage to be able to work from home, because it doesn't work for everyone. For staff, the communication, the change was significant. On on the 11th, I had a stand-up meeting with the staff. On the 11th, on the 13th, it was a voice conference call. It was very rapid change. A lot of the staff hadn't been familiar with or weren't familiar with voice conferencing and Skype. People didn't understand what Zoom was at the time. They might have understood Party House. I'm not so sure about Zoom. And each staff member had their own particular circumstances. Some thrived and had excellent environments, others different. When you're working in a remote access telephone environment, background noise, childcare issues, data confidentiality, in some cases it's not suitable to be talking to a customer about customer details in an environment. So we had to look at each staff member, those critical staff members that had the knowledge, to make sure that we could get them working in an environment that suited them. And looking at some of the logs, you see the people working all the hours that were available. Staff are used to working in teams. The individual team was a huge change. As one of the implications of staff moving out the door that quickly is they went from the environment of support of having their supervisor and their colleagues available close to them, feeling isolated, the potential of feeling very isolated. So very quickly we had to rebuild that team environment in a virtual role. And that takes a lot of effort to get that there, to make sure that the staff have the support they need, that they have mechanisms, new mechanisms. You can't just put somebody in hold and walk across the floor like it's worked before. The service that we were operating previous to COVID was predominantly phone-based. An employer needed an almost instant response to their resolutions. They were paying people. They were normally contacting us on the day, and they needed to deal with it. And likewise, in COVID, when they're trying to run the payroll and they're trying to get the subsidy details correct, it is time critical. Previously, we were running 80% of our contacts were phone related. By moving people across electronic channels, we got that across. So we're now at about 70% of our contacts is electronic, and still 30% are telephone. That change in model has allowed us to deploy staff and to bring in staff like Sarah from across the country and across the organization. Staff who don't have the experience to be able to deal with some of these cases live on the phone, but if you give them that small extra bit of time, dealing with electronic communication does. It gives them the environment to be able to give proper and appropriate responses to employers to deal with. Illness featured in our team. To this, I have no doubt that one in awareness and with relation to the cleansing the separations in the unit itself, and secondly, separate staff from a significant impact for our team and our ability to support TWSS. I would say 2 or 3 more days and we would have been in significant difficulties because of the illness that featured in our core team. And each staff member has their own experience of it in their own family, the family stories of asking people to work. One of our own colleagues worked the day her mother passed away, and it was unbelievable commitment from the staff in such environments. Service approach. Generally speaking, our service approach in the employer helpline is divert and self-service to minimize unnecessary contact. We will provide as much timely information as we can to employers as possible. We have the advantage in that, generally speaking, our customer is a pay clerk or an accountant, so we can go for that. We can discuss the more complex queries and the more complex aspects with them. But the earlier we can provide information to them, the more we can minimize unnecessary contact. And secondly, efficiently and effectively serve there to deal with those contacts when they do arise. The FAQ guidance documents was the key resource to staff and employers. Those FAQ documents were coming out at fairly strange times sometimes. It was the key way we were getting information out as the scheme was developing and it was changing. The statistics are showing that that FAQ documents have been downloaded about 170,000 times. Evidence-based analysis of contacts. Sarah mentioned this as well. We have to look at the contacts and be able to categorize them to be able to identify where the hot topics are, particularly in wide environments, where you've got teams spread across the country. To be able to analyze and categorize, to be able to find where the pain points are. In the majority of cases, our first priority is to stop it from happening for future submissions. So if an employer is having a difficulty, let's fix it now for all futures payments, and we'll go back and we'll sort out the past as soon as possible. Training and knowledge transfer is huge. I can't underemphasize that. They try and get that information across. Literally, we were training people on information that was agreed that day. The operational scheme, the details of the operational scheme, which came in on the 4th of May, were agreed on Wednesday morning. We got sign-off. We got sign-off from Declan on Wednesday morning on some of the details. And we were delivering remote training at 2 o'clock that day. Within the next 4 days, with 300 training sessions delivered for the experienced staff on the operation of the scheme, and we went live with that scheme the following Monday morning. So from Wednesday to Monday, to get the staff up, to get them trained on it, and to take live submissions, was a phenomenal turnaround. The structure we put in place, because of the size of the team we had, as we scaled it out, we couldn't bring people in at the level. We couldn't just drop people in without the experience. So we had to put an extra layer of triage in front of it. So we front-ended the organization, the employer helpline, with staff from across our organization. That was hugely important for us. We were able to get those most frequently asked questions dealt with on a timely basis. The level 2 team, or experienced team, that was the team of the people who had the expertise to understand the detail of how it will integrate into payroll, how the 2 things, payroll and TWS, combine properly and to deal with the complex queries. There's a dedicated support team within the employer helpline as well to look after escalation management and knowledge transfer. If an employee and the first level has an issue that they can't deal with, they escalate to the second level. That goes the whole way up to policy decision if necessary. And on the way down, we've got to make sure that's sent out to everybody. And that should happen within hours. So if we get a new type of query that comes in, we need to get a rapid response answer to that. And we need to get that out to the staff across the whole country as quick as possible. Change management, we had from 2018 to January, February 20, change management was what we were about. And I suppose that stood to us. We had implemented an awful lot of change, and the pace of decision-making and immediate implementation was hugely important. As well as that, our involvement in the decision was hugely important as well. We were directly involved in the decision-making of the implementation. While policy was set by government and board, the employer helpline team had direct involvement in the decisions on the way the system was being developed, so that we were able to come from the customer service perspective to minimize the impact on employers and employees, and to make sure that we could minimize those unnecessary contact. When you look at the time scale that was happening, the TWSS scheme was being rapidly developed. In effect, we were taking submissions from employees and employers on Friday, the 26th, at the same time that Dáil was finalising the bill, passing it through. So that when it was signed into legislation over the weekend, we were able to make payments by the following Monday morning. This wouldn't have been possible without systems capability and rapid system development. Just given the complexity of the calculations, and all the details involved in it, the mechanism by which employers could send information into revenue and get money back. If an employer made a submission to revenue at 10 o'clock at the night, we had that processed the following morning by 7 o'clock, and the file was sent to the bank by 12, and the employer was probably getting the money the following day, if not the day after. In many cases, we were pre-funding the payroll, and if an employer was making a submission on Monday to us, they had the money in their account on Wednesday for payroll on Friday. The critical success factors for us: immediate action. We had to go from decision to implementation very quickly. Willingness of management and especially staff to adapt. It wouldn't have been possible. What we considered impossible yesterday was in place today, just the nature of it. Knowledge sharing and communication, can't overstate that. Robust policies and procedures that were scalable. Sarah spoke of their ramping up. We are similar. We went from 80 staff to 250 staff in 2 weeks. The voice of service delivery in the service design and delivery was hugely important as well. The support from our ICT department, and in particular the Payroll Software Developers Association. Without the payroll software developers changing their software to incorporate the payroll, this wouldn't have worked. Where to next? It's far from over. The scheme has been extended to August this year. The next wave is as the employers reopen and rehire. We'll continue to adapt as the scheme adapts. We're planning for the scheme wind down and reconciliation as employers return to work and as they see that they no longer need the support. The unknowns, I'm picking up tips and listening to everything some people say today to see where we're going for the future. Will there be a return to an office environment? Is there going to be a new way of working? How are we going to deal with all the leave that's been built up? Because there's been a lot of leave due to staff over this. As for what's in store for us in 2021, after looking back for the last few years, in particular January, February, March this year, we're afraid to ask. Thank you for your time, and sorry for skipping through it so quickly.